After years of reading philosophy, I've noticed that contrary to the stereotypical philosopher image, I actually have less to say about meaning, not more. And I don't think that's because I haven't learned anything. I think it's rather because the real answer is both simpler and more demanding than the endless circular debates around the topic. The truth is that meaning isn't discovered or found at the end of any treasure map. It's built through a specific architecture that most of us never learn to see. The standard questions of what's the purpose of life or how do we find meaning, they assume meaning exists somewhere outside waiting to be uncovered. My inquiry into the subject has led me to believing that it's precisely the other way around. Meaning emerges only when specific conditions align, and our job isn't to simply go out and blindly find it, but to understand the fundamental structure behind and then build our way into a truly meaningful life. And so, this is my first attempt at outlining that architecture. It's just a beginning, so don't expect a complete framework. So we have to start from the beginning, the false dichotomy problem. Before I can explain the architecture, I need to clear away some philosophical debris. Most discussions of meaning today get trapped in a comfortable but misleading debate. Is meaning subjective, entirely personal, or objective, existing independently outside in reality? This debate feels important because both sides actually capture something true. The subjectivists are right that meaning must feel personal. No one else can tell you what's meaningful to you. When something feels meaningful, that feeling is irreducibly yours in some way, connected to your particular history, psychology, and circumstances. No external authority can simply declare something meaningful to you and make it so. And yet, the objectivists are onto something too. Meaning must connect to something beyond our personal preferences. Because when one experiences meaning, it is clear that it belongs in a fundamentally deeper and more stable realm than that of fleeting subjective preferences. When something truly feels meaningful, it doesn't feel like you're simply choosing it or preferring it. It is as if you're recognizing something that was already true, something that would remain important even if your mood or taste changed tomorrow. It carries a kind of weight that transcends "I happen to like this." I believe this is also where the misleading notion of finding meaning spawns from. The purely phenomenological account of what it is to experience meaning seems to push us towards such an understanding. I certainly do not adhere to such a purely phenomenological account, but it is nonetheless essential for pointing out what I just did, for pointing out the gap I just mentioned. Moreover, think about the difference between saying "I enjoy chocolate ice cream" and "my work as a teacher is meaningful." The first is clearly preference. It could change and that would be fine. The second feels like it touches something more fundamental. Even if you stopped enjoying teaching on a personal level, you'd likely still recognize it's meaningful. It's a meaningful activity, no? This difference, this felt distinction between preference and meaning, suggests, to me at least, that pure subjectivism is missing something essential. But here's what I've come to think of the entire debate. It's simply asking the wrong questions. It's like arguing whether a bridge is really about its foundation or its span. To be a bridge, it obviously needs both parts present. A bridge without a foundation would collapse before we could even call it a bridge. And one without a span, well, to be honest, I can't really even conjure up a picture of what that would look like. My point is that the bridge needs both foundation and span to work together in a specific structural relationship. And only then does what we call a bridge come to life. The same is true for meaning. The question isn't whether meaning is subjective or objective. It's how internal and external dimensions combine to create the experience we recognize as meaningful. So, I want to spend a minute on this, because if it isn't purely subjective or objective, meaning that is, what is it? Like, what does it actually look like in lived experience? The key, I believe, is to focus on the intersection between internal disposition and external circumstance. By internal disposition, I mean your psychological makeup, your temperament, values, capabilities, and what genuinely resonates with you and who you are. And by external circumstance, I mean the actual conditions of your life. The opportunities available, the constraints you face, the needs of your community, and the historical moment you inhabit. Sometimes this intersection creates friction. Other times it creates synergy. And it's in understanding this dynamic that we begin to see how meaning actually works. Let me make this less abstract. Consider two people, let's say Lila and John, both with a deep psychological orientation toward teaching. They find genuine satisfaction in explaining complex ideas. They feel energized by that moment when understanding dawns in someone's eyes, and have unusual patience with the repetitive aspects of pedagogical work. Their internal disposition is identical. Lila, the first person, teaches in a well-resourced school with supportive administrators, engaged families, and a community that values education. The internal disposition of Lila doesn't just find expression here, it's amplified by the environment. If you would allow a small digression, I actually think a more fitting and precise concept to use here instead of amplified would be Hegel's notion of sublation, of Aufbau, in German. Because Lila's internal disposition isn't just boosted, it's preserved, cancelled, and it's elevated to a higher and more complex form, to a more perfect form, if you will. The internal disposition undergoes a form of metamorphosis in this milieu. If you're unfamiliar with Hegel and this conception, just ignore sublation for now and think of it as amplification. It's crude but works fine as a starting point since it gestures toward the same general direction at least. Anyways, the point in large here is that every external factor reinforces Lila's internal disposition here. The intersection between the internal disposition and external circumstance is purely synergistic. Now let's circle back to the second person, to John. John teaches in an under-resourced system plagued by hostile bureaucracy, standardized test obsessions, and families who view school as glorified babysitting. John's internal disposition, even though it is identical to Lila's, constantly crashes against these external constraints daily. And so, here comes friction. Imagine how John spends his Sunday crafting an engaging lesson about the Civil War using primary sources, only to be told on Monday morning he must use the district's test prep packet instead. And when a student finally grasps a difficult concept and wants to explore it further with John, he has to cut them off. Well, there simply is no time for such a discussion. He has 32 other kids to watch out for. One can go on and imagine such friction being brought into the everyday life of John, but the point is that the entire milieu behind John's work is working against him. Every external factor undermines what John knows teaching could be. He still has that same internal drive, that joy in explaining, that patience with repetition, that thrill when understanding dawns. But the structure around constantly negates these impulses. The intersection creates constant friction. Here's the thing I've tried articulating in this short little piece. The difference in the experience of meaning isn't about passion, commitment, or even skill. It's about how internal disposition intersects with external reality. It's not just that Lila went out in the world and discovered her calling, her meaning. She is experiencing structural alignment. And John isn't feeling meaningless because he hasn't looked hard enough for his true purpose. He is actually precisely where his calling demands him to be. But alas, he has fallen into the demonic grip of structural misalignment. And this is why I argue that meaning isn't something you simply find within yourself or discover in the world outside of yourself. It emerges from the specific quality of intersection between the two. Thank you for watching. Let me know what you think. See you next time.